While addressing the United Nations on Tuesday, French President Emmanuel Macron called for collective efforts to solve supposed global crises. The Bible says the Antichrist will have a collectivist mindset. I will answer the questions, what is collectivism and where is the prophecy located in Scripture that tells us this on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with End Time Ministries. And I thank you for joining me on Thursday's edition of End of the Age. I'm broadcasting from our General Conference floor in Louisville, Kentucky today. Irvin Baxter's in a meeting, and we've had meetings all day long, and we've been going to services at night. And so I do thank you for joining me. And man, there's so much going on in prophecy right now. It's really hard for us to keep up with it all. We've got a research team, and I've got people all over the world that send me information. And it's still, every once in a while, we will miss something. So we want to try and do our best to try to keep you guys up to date on everything. But I want to focus on something specific today that's been happening over the last couple of days. Most of you will know Irvin Baxter's been talking about the United Nations speeches, Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron and different things. But on today's program, I want to really drill down something. I want to make sure you understand the political atmosphere in our world today, how it correlates with Bible prophecy, and many of these things is a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Prophecy foretells a time just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ when the Antichrist, the leader of the world government in the end time, and people would either support that world government and the Antichrist or fight against it. I mean, that's where we're headed. We've got a world religion, a world government that's coming. It's prophesied in the Bible. We do have a timeline that we follow. Many of you know what that timeline is. The Six Trumpet Wars coming, the peace agreement that starts the final 7 years. But in the background of all of this, there's a world religion that's going to be formed, and it's been being formed for years now, and there's going to be a world government. And so we're watching those things being formed, and in the end, people will there's going to be a divide. People will either support that world government and that world religion, fall into alliance with them, and pledge allegiance to them, or they're going to be diametrically opposed to it. The true Church of Jesus Christ will be diametrically in opposition to that. And so we're going to talk about that today because we're watching that great divide. We've been watching it for some time now, but some of the speeches have led up to this great divide, and I want to talk about that and really make sure you understand what's going on, because you can listen to speeches at the United Nations and think, wow, that was an awesome speech. He said a few things I understood, but at the end of the day, I didn't understand much of it. But I want to make sure you understand and grasp the situation, because, folks, we're living in the end time right now. I'm not speculating. Are we looking at the end time in the future? No, we're there. And so I want to make sure you understand what's going on today through the lens of Bible prophecy. So until Donald Trump came into office, the United States of America was headed straight into the arms of this world governing body. Now, I want to let that sink in, because for the last 7+ decades, every administration was basically yielding up more and more sovereignty year after year, to the point where if certain people would have been elected in the last election, we would be right on down the road towards world government here in the United States of America. And remember, we signed a Declaration of Independence, not interdependence. So until Donald Trump came into office, we were headed straight into the arms of that world governing body. Whether it was Republican or Democrat, over the last 70+ years, we were moving in that direction. In other words, nobody came into office and said, we will not have this anymore, we're pulling out. You see what I'm saying? We were headed in that direction, whether it was Republican or Democrat. You see, at the end of the day, and I know a lot of you probably realize this, but there's really no such thing. If you really get into the upper echelons of politics, there's really no such thing as Democrat, Republican anymore. Now, I know you can go either vote Republican ticket or Democrat ticket, and it seems to be a divide. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at this world government as a whole, the big picture, we've still, whether Republican administration or Democrat administration, we've still been headed down that road over the last 70 plus years. So there are really, in the upper echelons of world government, of politics, there's only those that push the agenda of the world government and those that oppose it. At the end of the day, that's what we're looking at. And so you might say, well, hold on a minute, Dave, not Republicans. I mean, come on. So I have a question for you. Who was the president of the United States that began to get us used to the term New World Order? Who was that? It wasn't Bill Clinton. It wasn't Barack Obama. It was George H.W. Bush, a Republican. So listen at this address to the nation, announcing the Allied military action in the Persian Gulf. I know we're coming up to a break, and I'm not going to cut it short, so I want to make sure you hear it. But you understand what I'm talking about today. Look at the speeches that we've heard at the United Nations over the last several days, especially Donald Trump's and Emmanuel Macron's. And we'll talk about what's we're going into this time of world government, world religion, and there's going to be a clear separation before it's all over with.
End-time Bible prophecy is very complex and difficult to understand, and for some, a little bit scary. But what if you could understand Bible prophecy? What if you could know what will happen and how the United States will play a key role during end-time events? When you call today and get Understanding the End Time DVD curriculum, you can have peace about what is to come, while understanding the prophetic events that appear in our headlines every day. When you call or go online to endtime.com and order, you'll learn the answer to the biggest prophecy question of all. Will the rapture take place, and when will it happen? This 14-part DVD series is the definitive end-time prophecy Bible study available. And for this limited time, you can get it for just $149. Don't miss this special offer. Understanding the End Time. Call now, 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME. Or go to endtime.com today.
I have left a piece of my heart in Israel and her people. We would like to thank End Time for doing such an awesome job with our Israel tour. We marvel at your team keeping the time schedule, keeping everyone comfortable, the wonderful driver, the brilliant guide, the entire tour program, good hotel choices, and stellar food. We had the privilege to rub shoulders with Pastor Baxter, listen to his current teachings, and had some interesting questions answered so eloquently. He is wonderful. Helene from Australia.
Join Irvin and Judy Baxter May 2nd through the 17th, 2019 for the ultimate Israel tour experience with a Greek island cruise. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 to sign up today.
So in understanding what's really going on in the political landscape over the last several decades, and the Bible prophesies this world governing body that's going to be established just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, a lot of people would look at that and say, oh man, Republicans, Democrats, there's a clear divide. No, there's not a clear divide. George W. Bush got us used to the term New World Order, a Republican president. So we've all been headed in the same direction, whether Republican or Democrat. Listen to George H.W. Bush's address to the nation announcing the Allied military action in the Persian Gulf. This was January 16th, 1991. He said, this is a historic moment. We have in the past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations, here it is, a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. He said, when we are successful, and we will be, there was no doubt in his mind, we have, now this is the President of the United States, this is not Russia, China, North Korea, this is the President of the United States. He said, when we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this New World Order, an order in which a credible United Nations, not the United States, who signed a Declaration of Independence, but an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. You got a Republican president stating, I'm behind this 100%, and we will be successful. The Bible says they're talking about the establishment of a world governing body. So George H.W. Bush, a Republican, supported the United Nations and the New World Order, or the world government, the same world government prophesied to be in power at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ in the Battle of Armageddon. Well, in Donald Trump's speech Tuesday, he stated, this is why America will always choose independence and cooperation over global governance, control, and dominion, and domination, something diametrically opposed to the international community even. And that afternoon, French President Emmanuel Macron, and this is what I want to focus on today, because if you don't listen to these speeches, you don't follow the stuff, and you don't understand some of the terms, you can't define some of the terms that they say in their speeches, you don't really get the gravity of what's really happening. And I want to make sure you get that today. That afternoon, following Donald Trump's speech, French President Emmanuel Macron rebuked President Trump before the entire international community for the ideology of America first, nationalism, and individualism. The international community is absolutely opposed to America first, the doctrine of Trump. Nationalism, individualism. They're all about multilateralism, world government, global governance. And what I'm going to focus on today, collectivism. So this thinking obviously is contrary to the world government, and how, since it's been forged for the last 73 years, or the formation of the United Nations in 1945. That's the last-ditch effort of this world governing body, the United Nations, the seat of world government. So, in Global Citizen, and I want to focus on some of Macron's, not very much. I'm not going to spend much time on Macron, because I want to get into some of the definitions of some of these terms, because if you can't define them, it's just another speech at the United Nations. Who cares, right? No, there's a whole lot more to it than that. This is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Listen at this. The global citizen. So right there, I mean, who's putting out the information? Look at the source. The global citizen, not the individual, not the person in the United States, but the global citizen. This is what they're headed towards. This is what they want. A global body, a global state that answers to a world governing body. So the global citizen said, don't accept our history unraveling. This is Macron. He urges the world to take collective action at the United Nations. What I want you to remember as I read this is the word collective. Very, very, very important. Not individual, but collective. So, why should global citizens care? This is from the Global Citizen. President Macron made the case that many global challenges, including climate change, water scarcity, and technological change, are best addressed through a multilateral approach. Many nations gathering together, i.e. the United Nations, to handle these supposed global challenges. Global warming, climate change, obviously that's a hoax. The climate's been changing every day since God created the planet. So at the end of the day, man-made global warming, which is causing the climate to change, it's a complete hoax. But at the end of the day, he's saying the United Nations, we need to gather together as nations collectively and handle these supposed issues. And many times they dream up these issues because they're pushing a world government. He said the international world order is being undermined by policies. Now this is Emmanuel Macron. Undermined by policies of nationalism. Nationalism, i.e. the United States. We signed a Declaration of Independence. We don't want to be interdependent on all the other nations. We signed a Declaration of Independence. But there are people that have weeded themselves into the upper echelon of our government over time that said, hey, we're going away from the Declaration of Independence. We're going into interdependence with the other nations of the world because we want a world governing body. Yes, right here in the United States. So Macron described nationalism, how nationalism can make countries vulnerable to climate change. In other words, if you sign a Declaration of Independence, then you're vulnerable to climate change. Come on, everybody. It's a hoax. It's a hoax perpetrated by the United Nations. He said, and then demographic shifts, technological change, and other issues. He said, now get this, at a time when our collective system is falling apart. Collective, remember the word. When our collective system is falling apart, multilateralism, or world government, is most in demand. So he's pushing this agenda, the behind-the-scenes agenda, the collective system. He said, in many ways, Macron positioned himself as the inverse to U.S. President Donald Trump. Donald Trump had just given a speech that morning talking about nationalism, individualism. We're not going to comply with the global governing edicts of the United Nations. And he was giving a speech at the United Nations. So here comes Macron rebuking Donald Trump. And Macron repeatedly referenced U.S. policies, and he recast many of the principles Trump spoke about in his address, particularly the idea of sovereignty, which is what we all enjoy here in the United States, at least for the most part. Whereas Trump said that sovereignty has hindered the global bodies like the UN, has been hindered by the global bodies, but like the UN. Absolutely a true statement. Macron said that sovereignty, get this, he said that sovereignty is only made possible through multilateral cooperation on issues like climate change and trade that are global in nature. In other words, we need a global government to truly be, for people to truly have the sovereignty that they deserve. Oh, I mean, come on. We do not need, I don't need somebody in Russia on a UN Security Council telling me and interested in my sovereignty as an individual. It's simply not the case. So he goes on to say, only collective, there it is again, only collective action, only global governance, in other words, allows for the upholding of the sovereignty and equality of the people in whose name we take action. He said, this is the reason we must take action against climate change, demographic, and digital challenges. No one alone can tackle these. So he's giving a rebuke to Donald Trump in his speech. He said, and of course, Macron, who has often sought to work constructively with Trump, you know, they said, well, these guys have a bromance in the beginning. They were really close. Well, it now says that he elaborated on the benefits of specific multilateral arrangements, or i.e. global governance, that the Trump administration has abandoned. UNESCO and all these other different, the Global Compact on Migration, all the other different ones that Donald Trump's pulled us out of. And you realize none of the other presidents for the last 70 plus years have been willing to pull us out of that, to take a stand and say, we will not comply with this. We've all been marching straight into the arms of a world government until Donald Trump come to office. Forget the fact that he's Donald Trump. He's the president of the United States, and he's pulling us out of the United Nations slowly but surely. Now, we may never pull completely out, because it would really be, at the end of the day, it has worked to our benefit to be part of the UN Security Council, because we've been able to protect Israel from their resolutions that they passed, anti-Israeli resolutions. We've been able to veto those. So it's worked to our advantage to that point, to that end. But at the end of the day, all these other organizations that we've pulled out of, that's Donald Trump. He's the president of the United States. You know, I'm not praising Donald Trump just because he's the man. I'm saying he is a man that came in and started pulling us out of these organizations, which has been a very good thing. We don't want to be a part of that. The Antichrist is going to rule all this before it's over with. You understand the gravity of the situation now. So Macron, and finally, Macron said, do not accept the erosion of multilateralism. In other words, he's saying that Donald Trump has been a hindrance to their move into this global governing system. He said, don't accept our history unraveling. I'm not getting used to it. I'm not turning my head. And this is my commitment to you, and I count on you. He's talking to the General Assembly. So to sum it all up, French President Macron is against nationalism. He's against individualism, and he is pro the term collectivism. That's what I want to focus on today, collectivism. If you don't understand what collectivism is, then you really don't understand Emmanuel Macron's speech. So I want to define some of these terms, because you've got to understand this stuff. This is something you do not want to be a part of. And you can understand that this can filter down into, and has for years, the United States of America, our beloved country that people have fought and died and shed their blood for. And so you've got to understand this, because we have elections coming up. And socialism is a derivative of collectivism. It is one of the derivatives. And so we have to understand what this is. If socialism is a derivative of collectivism, I don't want no part of it. And so it's very important. So let's define some of these terms. The term nationalism, it's loyalty and devotion to a nation, okay? Emmanuel Macron is against that. It's exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on not necessarily the people, but a culture, a Christian nation above, let's say, maybe an Islamic nation or something like that, that would not, religiously agree. We would say, I would rather be part of a Christian nation, right? I mean, most people would. So at the end of the day, Emmanuel Macron would say, I'm against that. In 1776, we signed the Declaration of Independence, not a declaration of interdependence. So we created our own nation. It's the United States. It's this experience, this it's our experiment on true sovereignty, on us being individuals and not a collectivist group. We didn't want that. We broke away from that, 1776. And then Emmanuel Macron's against that. Individualism, there's another term. If you don't understand what that means, how can you even understand the speech that he gave? So individualism, it's a political and social philosophy that emphasizes the moral worth of the individual, not the group. We don't decide things according to how it's going to best fit the group. There really is no such thing as a group. You understand that? There are only, let's say, 100 people. There's 100 individuals there that all have rights. You can't say, well, the group, so hence this is how we're going to rule. No, because then you can't eliminate people's rights so that you can comply with the group. It doesn't work like that. I have individual rights that are granted to me by God, and you can't step over those rights and say, but because of the group, we're going to do X. Can't do that. And so it's individualism. Emmanuel Macron's against that. Listen to his speech. So we signed the Declaration of Independence. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Regardless of your race, regardless of your background, you're created equal. And all of you, they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. You cannot take those away because of the group. It's individualism. Those that believe in world government are against this. But our forefathers, they believed in this. And that's why we signed a Declaration of Independence. So now, to really get a good view of Macron's speech, let's talk about collectivism. Remember, he said we need collective action. He was preaching collective. We've got to have the group. We've got to have this global governance. We've got to have a world government. That's what he's preaching. He's talking to the world government. His speech is given to the General Assembly. So let's define collectivism. And G. Edward Griffin, he wrote, he's a wonderful author. He wrote The Fearful Master about the United Nations, exposing that for what it really was, him and others. He wrote The Creature from Jekyll Isle, exposing the Federal Reserve for what it really is. It's no more federal than Federal Express. It has nothing to do with the government. But yet they control our finances here in the United States. They control the interest rates. They just raised interest rates for the third time. I mean, but yet it is owned by a group of bankers. It's a privately owned group. It has nothing to do with our federal government. But a lot of people think it is. Well, G. Edward Griffin exposed that. And so in his book, Creature from Jekyll Isle, many of you will recognize that. So we're talking about collectivism. He defined it in such, I want to go through it because you could never understand Macron's speech and why he is so diametrically opposed to Donald Trump, who's slowly but surely pulling us out of these world governing organizations until you understand the term collectivism. Very, very important, and it ties in with Bible prophecy because this world government that's being established is prophesied. Revelation chapter 13. I'll go through the prophecy here in just a moment. So there are many words commonly used today to describe political attitudes, okay? And, you know, you're supposed to fall in under one of these, right? I mean, it's dictated almost. You have to be one or the other. That's actually not true, but the globalists think that. So there are many words that describe today, and in today's world, that describe political attitudes. You're either told that you're a conservative, a liberal, libertarian, progressives. Most people can't even define these terms. Left-wingers, right-wingers, socialists, communists, Maoist, Trotskyist, fascists, Nazis. I mean, there's a plethora of these terms that we give people. Most people can't even define what they are. So, and if that isn't confusing enough, now we have neoconservatives, neo-Nazis, neo-everything else. So when we're asked with what our political views are, we're expected to choose from one of those words, right? I mean, I've got to be either conservative or this. I mean, if you say I'm an independent, everybody's like, oh, he's in a cult. So think about it. And so we're asked, what are our political views? What are we expected to choose from one of these words? You've got to choose, right? I mean, it's just dictated, it's mandated. You got to choose. So if we don't have a political opinion, or if we're afraid of making a bad choice, then we play it safe and say, well, we're a moderate or independent, adding yet one more word to the list, okay? So social mores and religion. Now, I'm defining collectivism. You've got to understand this because this is being talked about in the upper echelons of political society today. Collectivism. So, okay, we're coming up to a break. When we get back, I'll continue on with my definition of collectivism, and then we'll get into the prophecy, and you can see how all this ties together perfectly. The prophecy given 2,000 years ago, and we're watching it coming to pass in intricate detail right now, this week. Trump, Macron, all these other, they're talking, the Netanyahu, they're all talking about the peace agreement. All these prophecies coming to pass right now. We are in the end time,
with Irvin
folks.
Baxter, the new book by Irvin's grandson, provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your connection to God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at End Time will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real-life change. Order this brand new book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
If ever people needed to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for End Time magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. End Time has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that End Time magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctor's offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So, I mean, as you can tell, there's no doubt we're in the end time. There's no doubt about it. I mean, with the world government, the world religious system, all these things that are happening right now, the coming up to a peace agreement, all the prophecies that have been fulfilled up to this point, if you're looking at a huge timeline, we're there. We're in the end time, just a few years away from the second coming of Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. So in defining collectivism, very, very important, because Emmanuel Macron, he was preaching collectivism. We need collective action, collectivism. And in looking at all these terms today, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a neo-Nazi, you're a socialist, really not one person in 1,000 can clearly define the ideology of most of these words. They're just labels that are given because you have to be part of one of these. Most of them really come from one thing, and we'll get to that in a minute. They're used primarily as labels to impart an aura of either goodness or badness, and it's really just this mirage that's up in front of everybody, depending on who uses the words and what emotions they trigger in their minds. So to become clear on this one thing called the ideology, our first order of business really is to throw out the garbage. And I want to do that. I want to clear everything up today. If we are to make sense of the political agendas, these political speeches, all these different things that happen, and they're going on all week. They're at the United Nations. That really they're dominating our planet today. You hear all these terms, but yet people really, I don't know which one I am really. So if we are to make sense of all this, we have to not allow our thinking to be contaminated by the emotional load of the old vocabulary. And it may surprise you to learn that most of the great political debates of our time, at least in the Western world, can be divided really into two viewpoints. I mean, let's peel all the layers of the onion away and boil it down to its essence. One viewpoint is that political actions can be judged on the merits of their expected benefit to society or to a special class within society. You've seen it happen over the years. The other viewpoint is that actions should be judged by an ethical standard that justifies or forbids that action regardless of the benefit. So this is a contest between the ethics of collectivism, or the group on the one hand, and individualism on the other. So these words have clearly defined meaning, and they represent really an ideological chasm that divides the entire Western world. Look at our political atmosphere in the United States right now. I mean, this was the difference. This is the difference between Donald Trump's United Nations speech and the speech given by French President Emmanuel Macron. Individualism and collectivism. Trump's speech was devoted to America first, individualism, nationalism. Macron's speech was based on a collectivist ideology. And in many ways, this defines the political atmosphere in America today. I mean, I recently watched a debate between Senator Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke in a U.S. Senate in race in Texas, and it sounded just like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And the one thing that is really common, so you can see that there's collectivists, there's the progressive on one side, and there is the individualist, the nationalist on the other side. It looked like I was almost watching one of the debates between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. The one thing that is really common to both collectivists and individualists is that the majority of them are well-intentioned. Now, in well-intentioned, some of them believe world government is just the best thing that could happen to all of us. And obviously we know that that's not true, but they want the best really life possible for their families, their countrymen, and for mankind. Many of them do. And they want prosperity and justice for their fellow man. And, where they disagree, honestly, is how to bring that about. And I mean, the dogma is diametrically opposed. A study of collectivist literature from leading fascist, communist, and socialist reveals certain recurring themes that may be considered as the 8 pillars of collectivism. Okay, and if the values they represent are reversed, they become the 8 pillars of individualism. So this is the difference in Donald Trump's speech and Emmanuel Macron. In other words, there are 8 concepts of social and political relationships, and each of them, collectivism and individualists, have opposing views. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's the pillars. So the source of rights, where does that come from? A collectivist believes those source of rights comes from the state. An individualist believes that those are from the people, the governed individuals. Supremacy comes from the group. Individualist believes it's an individual. The desired action is coerced from a collectivist. And it's voluntary from an individualist standpoint. So think collectivist, Emmanuel Macron, individualist, Donald Trump. Property owned, collectivists by the state. Individuals, privately. The choice of money, collectivists, no. Individualists, yes. We want to be on a gold standard. Collectivists, no. Laws, they favor some, in a collectivist opinion. In individuals, they're equal for all, regardless of your race, your education, financial status. Leadership is by coercion from a collectivist, but it's by persuasion. It's by a democracy by an individualist. And pillars, the state power is aggressive with the collectivist, but it's defensive with an individualist. So you see the big difference here. This would be the difference between Emmanuel Macron's speech and Donald Trump's speech. Emmanuel Macron said we have to have collective action to handle all these supposed crises in the world. And here's the big difference. Look at the left and the right today. We're told that communists and socialists are at the extreme left of the spectrum, and that fascist groups and groups like that are at the extreme on the right. Two adversaries pitted against each other because supposedly they're opposites. But upon analysis, if you look really closely, however, we find that they are not opposites at all, that they both rest upon the 8 pillars of collectivism. So all of these are derivatives of socialism, communism. We're going to get to that in a minute. They're derivatives of this ideology called collectivism. Very important, because if you're going to understand Macron's speech, you've got to understand collectivism. In the United States and most Western countries, there is this mirage of these two political parties opposing each other, one on the right, one on the left. Yet when we get past the party rhetoric and all the slogans, we find that the leaders of both parties support the 8 principles of collectivism. Now, really, that's the way it's been up until Donald Trump was elected. And they do represent a right wing and a left wing, but they're merely 2 wings on the same ugly bird, honestly. And, you know, okay, let's go through some of the terms. Communism, Nazism, fascism, socialism, they all gravitate towards bigger government. They're all coming from the same ideology, bigger government to handle all these things, because that's the logic of their ideology. Under collectivism, all problems must be solved by the state. The more problems there are, the more powerful the state must become. That's the ideology. And once we get on that slippery slope, there's no place to stop until we reach the end of the scale, which is total government. Regardless of what you name it, regardless of how we rebel, we relabel it to make it seem new or different. Collectivism is totalitarianism. Well, and so that's why I've been kind of alarmed that we've had socialists that have been being elected into our government. And I mean, I've been really surprised. I mean, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, a progressive, same thing as a socialist. Bernie Sanders, a democratic socialist, it's all the same thing. So this leads to, and all of these, communism, fascism, socialism, they're all derivatives of this ideology called collectivism. And this leads to the stunning realization that, listen at these titles: communism, fascism, Nazism, socialism, so when you hear about socialism in the news, think about this: neoconservatism, liberalism, the New Deal, progressivism, Hillary Clinton, a progressive, the Great Society, technocracy, and the New World Order, and most of the other political nostrums of our century, they merely are variants of the same thing. It's called collectivism. Well, now you can kind of understand Macron's speech. We need to collectively act. We have this collective mindset, not an individual. Donald Trump was speaking on individualism, nationalism, a declaration of independence. Macron, we have to collectively deal with these crises in the world. Collective. It's a collectivist mindset. And now, once you know that communism and fascism and socialism and all these different isms are derivatives of collectivism, you understand the ideology of Macron in his speech. Until you can define these terms, you can be kind of lost. You can listen to these speeches and think, wow, these guys are giving speeches to the international community, but I really don't understand what they're saying. Now you do. And so it was a very good thing we saw when Emmanuel Macron was rebuking Donald Trump, because we understand Donald Trump is against the world government. You understand that? And he look at all he's doing. He's pulling us out of UNESCO, the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, all the different organizations that he's pulled us out of. He is going against the international community. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and the international community does not recognize that. You wonder why all these guys started howling at the moon when he did that, and we moved our embassy there. It's simply because he's against this world government, this international community. He stated it in his speech. I'm for individualism, not global governance. I'm for independence. And, oh, man, I mean, they are beside themselves. So this is the world government that we're looking at. It's exactly what Macron was talking about, a collectivist view at this world governing body. Now, you say, well, where is all that in the Bible? Well, how is that mentioned in Scripture? Well, let's talk about the prophesied world government. Very, very clear in Scripture. So it's found in Revelation chapter 13, but 650 years before John wrote the book of Revelation, the prophet Daniel was given a vision of 4 beasts that represented kingdoms or nations that would exist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. The 4 beasts, this is in Daniel chapter 7, the 4 beasts described, this is starting with Daniel 7, verses 4 through 7, and the modern nations that they symbolize are a lion with eagle's wings, which was Great Britain, the United States, a bear, which is Russia, a 4-headed leopard, which is Germany, a 10-horned beast, which is symbolizes the reborn Holy Roman Empire or the current European Union. And then in 650 years later in Revelation, when John wrote the book of Revelation, in Revelation 13, 1 through 2, John uses, now these guys were not contemporaries. Daniel never met John, John never met Daniel. But John uses the exact same symbols of nations, or animals, to describe nations. And it's a combo beast. There were 4 separate beasts in Daniel 7. In Revelation 13, they're a combo beast. They're all aligned together, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. They've federalized into one large global governing body. And the interpretation would go something like this. Many of you have heard this, but you've got to understand this in comparison to Donald Trump's speech and Macron's. And John said, "And I stood upon the sands of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns, which would symbolize the European Union, were 10 crowns. And upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard." So remember, there were 4 separate beasts in Daniel 7. And so, well, I tell you what, we're coming up to a break. So I'll give you the definition of this when we come back, the interpretation of what John saw in Revelation chapter 13. It's a world governing body. And it's being established right now. And so we'll go through that, Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 2, when we get back, define it. And what's the role of the United States? Why is it so prophetic that Donald Trump would speak against the international community?
Unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for End Time Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. End Time has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that End Time Magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctor's offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
So in describing this world governing body that John gave us a prophecy of 2,000 years ago, so none of these nations were even on the earth at the time of John the Apostle. And he gives a prophecy about this future beast that was symbolized by animals And he didn't realize it was 2,000 years in the future, but he was just being given a vision by God, and he writes it down. And it says, and I stood up on the sands of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So get this beast in a picture in your mind. 7 heads, 10 horns. And upon his horns, which symbolize the European Union, we're looking back through history, we can prove this, the European Union, and had 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw had the body of the leopard, which is Germany. The feet were as the feet of the bear, Russia. His mouth was as the mouth of the lion, Great Britain. And the dragon, Satan, gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. And it's very important that you understand that last sentence. And the dragon, which is Satan, gave him his seat, power, and great authority. Who's behind this world governing body today? Satan. Satan himself. And the Antichrist will be propped up by Satan. And this is a 2,000-year-old prophecy concerning the establishment of the world government that's being established right now. The United Nations is the seat of that world government. It has been for the last, 73 years now. It was the United Nations Charter was written in 1945, really by a convicted communist spy, Alger Hiss. And so, this is stuff you're not going to learn in high school. You gotta look back through history and seek it all out, and to understand really what's going on in the world today. Most of you thought, the last thing I want to do is listen to a United Nations speech. They're direct fulfillments of Bible prophecy, everyone. Many of them are. The peace agreement, everything that's being talked about over in the Middle East, a lot of different things are fulfillments of Bible prophecy. There's no way I have time today to go through everything. And so, very important. We'll do what we can every day, but it's very hard to keep up on everything that's going on. It's all happening so fast. Of course, we know that the United States is missing. You remember, so the eagle's wings, obviously symbolic of the United States. And back in Daniel 7, they're not mentioned in the combo world governing beast in Revelation 13. And of course, that lets us know the United States will not be included in the world government of the end time. And it also, the prophecy also lets us know that world dominance will have shifted from the United States, which has been the main driver behind the United Nations for the last 70 plus years. I mean, we were basically the driver that started it. That the powers are going to shift from the United States over to Europe. And we're watching that happening right now. How? Look at the speeches that happened Tuesday. Donald Trump is against the world government now, the leader of the President of the United States. And Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is absolutely pro. I mean, the European Union is global governance personified. You understand what's happened to the European experiment that's been going on. And so it's the reborn Holy Roman Empire. And they're the model of this global governing model. That's what's going on. The United States is pulling out of that. All of this is a direct fulfillment. This is the political atmosphere in the end time according to the Bible. The United States pulling out, powers are going to shift over to Europe. That's exactly what we're watching happening. This leaves us with a few questions, though. Many people have called in, and I've got the same questions myself. Well, since we're presently seeing the leader of the world government and how it will shift, how is the power going to shift? This power shift going to occur? That's one of the questions we've got. At this point, we don't know for sure. But we know it's going to happen, and I can kind of watch it. If you follow the news closely, you can see the shift. Europe has said, well, hey, if the United States doesn't want to play ball with the international community, we'll take the leadership role. That's probably how it's going to happen. I mean, we've been watching it happening for at least over the last 2 years now, with Donald Trump coming into power. And another question would be, will the United States, we know 6 trumpet wars coming, World War III. What's going to happen to the United States as a result of that? Are we going to be wiped out? Are we going to be knocked to our knees to the point? In other words, right now, we are the global superpower, period. The United States is. So how is power going to shift from us to them? How's that all going to work? It's a question that we've had. And then, are we perhaps going to go into isolation? I don't see that, because we're going to protect Israel. And I heard a speech by John Bolton the other day that said, somebody asked him, why don't we just pull out of the United Nations? Forget that. And he said, well, right now they're not, they don't affect our sovereignty that much. And number two, we can use our presence on the UN Security Council as a permanent member to protect Israel. And I got to thinking about that. Man, that's a good thing. And perhaps that's how we will protect Israel all the way through the final 3.5 years, the Great Tribulation. So some of these questions we can't answer right now, but we will be able to in the near future. And then there is a scripture that helps answer these questions. And that will help us in the future be able to say, okay, I know what's going on now. Revelation 12 is the only other place the United States, the eagle's wings, are mentioned in the prophecies of the end time. Revelation 12:13 says the dragon will persecute the woman which with 12 stars around her head. The woman is Israel, and the 12 stars symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel. So according to Revelation 13, the dragon will use the Antichrist and his world governing system to do the persecuting in the Great Tribulation. And the United States, right here, Revelation 12:14, it tells us that Israel will be protected during the Great Tribulation, which will occur during the final 3.5 years, immediately preceding the second coming. So we could use one of the ways we could protect her, obviously militarily, but another way, and we've done this 40 plus times since 1970, we protected her with our UN Security veto. UN Security Council veto, the power that we have, vetoing the resolutions by the United Nations. The Bible says in Revelation 12:14, and to the woman, which is Israel, were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, times and half a time, from the face of the serpent. So a clear understanding of Revelation 12 and 13 have allowed us to be absolutely sure of 2 things. The United States will stand with Israel and protect Israel from the world government in the end time. If you watch what's going on in the political atmosphere at the United Nations, we are protecting Israel, period. Especially the Trump administration. But honestly, several of the previous administrations have protected Israel with that veto power. Not just the Trump administration. We've stood with Israel. We've been her ally. And the Bible says that's exactly how it's going to be. And we've seen it this week. Donald Trump met with Israel, with Netanyahu, and had a wonderful meeting. We're standing with them militarily, financially, every way. And then number 2, the United States will not be part of the world government and therefore will not be under the reign of the Antichrist. We're watching that happening as we speak. This prophecy 2,000 years ago, everybody. And we're watching it happening right now. Even this week at the United Nations. We're watching these prophecies come to pass. So you understand, when you say, well, America's exit, how's that going to work? I mean, what happened in 1945? What are we exiting from? Believe it or not, a lot of people have no idea the United Nations. A lot of people think the United Nations is this great humanitarian organization that just goes in and feeds the sick, and they'll go into this disaster area and give relief and things like that. That's not what the United Nations was designed to be or to do. From the signing of the United Nations Charter in 1945, they were designed to be a communist global governing entity. That's what they were established to be. And so very, very important that you understand that. And until 2016 election, it was clear that the United States was in full compliance with this world governing system. We were the ones. The convicted communist spy Al Jarhis was working for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he's the one that wrote the charter for the United Nations. So it's clear the United States was in full compliance with the world governing system. Some presidents proceeded cautiously, while others blundered just forward, almost drunken on the dreams of a fully functioning world governing body. But no matter who was in office, very important, at the end of their administration, we still seem to be headed right in the same direction. And then, knowing the prophecies foretell America's absence from the world governing system, and the end time prophecy was being fulfilled, we knew that Washington, the political atmosphere, had to change. We watched it all along. There's this world governing body being established, and we're just watching every president right along just go right into it. And then, of course, comes the 2016 election. And you can see this whole thing playing out. It was like Donald Trump just kind of drops the hammer and says, no, we're not going, in his first speech at the United Nations, not going to do this. And he starts pulling us out of all these global governing organizations, UNESCO and all these different things. And Think about it. The number one issue by far in last year's presidential campaign was globalism. Globalism is the process of doing away with the nation state, and that the nation state is now obsolete, and that the world must move into a system of global governance. And so we want to do away with the nation state, create a global state that answers to a world governing body. That's the idea of globalism. But at the end of the day, going into the election in 2016, we knew that Hillary Clinton advocated globalism. She's a globalist. Bill Clinton's a globalist. They're liberal internationalists. They believed in they were going to if Obama was bad, Hillary Clinton would have been worse. Let's just put it like that. And, under the Obama administration, the U.S. we were pursuing the policy of globalization, one right after another. Obama was a big proponent of the emergent system of global governance. He threw America's borders wide open. I mean, how do you think the illegal immigrants came in? There's no way 12 million could come in here unless we throw our borders open. That would not be possible over the last several years. The Obama administration refused to enforce the immigration laws. Hillary Clinton promised to continue the globalist policies of Barack Obama. On the other hand, Donald Trump strongly opposed globalization, listened to some of his speeches, and he opposed open borders. Obviously, he stated, I will build a wall. And he wanted to control the borders and restore American sovereignty. Understanding the prophecies of America's secession from the ongoing process of globalization and open borders, he wanted to control our borders, or he wanted to get us out of this process of globalization and the further enslavement of this world governing body. And so we're sitting here looking at Hillary Clinton, knowing what the prophecies of the Bible say, and looking at Donald Trump and thinking, oh my goodness, is this going to be it? Well, of course, that's how it's played out. I mean, what other president do you know that has started pulling us out of all these global governing organizations, everybody? I mean, Donald Trump has stood up in his first speech at the United Nations. He hammers socialism. And, of course, socialism is the ideology of the United Nations. Remember, I said socialism is a derivative of collectivism. The group is more important than the individual, global governing body. I mean, that's what they're all about. That's their ideology, a socialistic, communistic ideology, wealth redistribution and all this other. It's one of the major planks of socialism. The United Nations is all about that. Look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And yet Donald Trump comes along and says, nah, I'm not going to play ball with you guys. Well, we're sitting here looking at the prophecies of the Bible and thinking, this is beginning to happen. And this, along with the peace agreement and all the different things. So I just wanted you guys to not pass over the speeches that have been going on at the United Nations. If you don't understand some of the terms, do your research. Make sure you understand, because, folks, we're not looking for the end time to begin. We're in the end time. And if you can understand some of these terms, individualism, nationalism, collectivism, then you can get a good grasp on what's going on. Folks, we're in the end time. We're living through the establishment of a world government and world religion as we speak. And it's very important that we understand that.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of End Time Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with End Time Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.